Hey y'all, Jill Vanderpool, and I am back in my art studio for another pastel tutorial painting. This time of a painting you guys told me that you loved and wanted to learn how to do. So this is a Supercell Thunderstorm that I thought was so fun to paint. I grew up in Texas and you could see these very intense, sort of magnificent storms. I would say all the time. It was kind of scary at times, but they're very cool. So let's dive into how I painted this. I'll walk through the supplies that I used. This one didn't take a huge color palette, which is kind of nice. But I'll just say, like I do at the beginning of all of my videos, is feel free to take your time, pause, slow down. There's no right pace, wrong pace of painting. This is really just meant for you to get a sense of how I created this, how you could create it yourself. I'll put the reference photo in the video, but I'll also link it in the bio. And yeah, let's get started and have some fun painting. So let's talk about the setup that I've got. I'm just at a regular desk in my home office / art studio, nothing super fancy. I'm using a tabletop easel where I'm taping the paper here. This is just a Meeden easel, and it allows the pigment to really fall down onto the ledge there and wipe it up for easy cleaning. For paper, I'm using UArt sanded paper. This is one of my favorites. You can use anything that you have on hand. I like this paper because it holds pigment really well. Pastel paper is good for that, but just use what you have. That's totally fine. I know paper can get expensive. Then I'm just using sort of a cheap artist tape that I use to kind of get very clean edges, which I prefer. You can also only tape the corners if you like. And then to keep my hands clean, I usually have a dry rag where I'm just getting the excess pigment off my hands or the pastel, and then using baby wipes when I'm really trying to get most of that pigment off my fingers. One other thing I usually have, especially in landscape paintings, is a ruler that I'm using just to make sure that my horizon line is straight, because that's really important for perspective in landscape paintings. You can see that there's a very clear horizon line here. And then let's talk about pastels. So I've got a range of brands here, but most importantly, I've got a good range of grays. So a really dark gray all the way down to white, which I ultimately use for the lightning. That's going to give us that contrast that we need. These little round ones that you see are from Unison, and then my white stick at the bottom, that's from Rembrandt. And then I've got some purples and some oranges to kind of add in some of that color under the clouds, as well as some greens that are from Giraud and Terry Ludwig for the field. I've also got a few extra colors here. This is just a little landscape set from Rocher. Just if you wanted to add some color in for wildflowers, you have so much freedom here, so whatever makes you excited, you can do. Anything you have on hand, I just like this little landscape set. And then I've got a few extra greens as I sort of figure out what works. It's nice to have just a range of colors. I'll link everything in this video description, but most importantly, I think having a good range of grays from a pretty dark gray to the very, very light, almost white color. So here's our reference photo that we're looking at, and you can see that this is a really dramatic thunderstorm. It really is supercell. And what I'm looking at first and foremost is sort of the shape and structure of the clouds. So up in the top left, I've got good dark clouds all the way down to sort of that anvil where the rain is coming out from under. And that's what we're going to be paying attention to and really making sure that we're mindful of that structure and how that structure sits against our horizon line. The other thing that I am going to be thinking a lot, particularly in this painting, is where are my darks and where are my lights? So you can see sort of midway towards the top, you have really bright clouds. So that's where we're going to make sure we're not afraid to use a lot of contrast, which you'll see me do in this painting. The other thing you'll see is really towards the edge of the cloud, there's some orange peeking through, and we'll want to make sure that we carry that through as well. All right, so let's dig in. I start by kind of blocking in the main colors. So using my dark gray here, just to get a sense of what is the shape of this cloud, because this is really going to anchor the whole structure of the storm. So I'm starting with some of the darkest portions of the storm, really thinking about where that shelf cloud sort of kind of comes out, because I think that's really a focal point of the storm, and then sort of filling in these darker areas. Coming in with my next value, we're just going to block all of this in. Now, clouds are not an exact science. They're always moving, always shifting. So don't worry too much about absolute perfection here. We're going to be doing a lot of layering and a lot of iteration throughout this. Coming in with these light values. And if you're not familiar with the term value, when we think about value in art, what we're looking at is how light a color is or how dark a color is. So a dark value is a very dark color. Like you could imagine if you took a photograph and put it into black and white, where you're really only seeing how dark or light something is, that's kind of how we refer to values. And value is what's going to help give us contrast. And then I'm just going to start blending. I like to blend with my finger. Some people will use gloves, whatever you're most comfortable with. I will say if you're not familiar with a sanded pastel paper, or this is one of your first times using it, I don't like to use a ton of pressure because it can sort of rub your fingers raw, so you'll want to be a little bit careful. You don't have to press super hard on this particular paper, but just be mindful not to sand your fingers down. Just blending all this out. We'll come back and add some more detail to it, but we just want to get, the general colors on the page and pigments down. Just starting to add a little bit of that cloud texture where we see the lightest portions of the cloud, always trying to keep that main structure sort of visible as we start adding in details. And don't be afraid of contrast. The darkest parts of this cloud are actually very dark, and the lightest parts of this cloud are very light. So don't be afraid of that. Just sort of lightly tapping on. I'll put my finger on the page and sort of lightly rub. I don't want to press super hard, but I just want to sort of guide the pigment into the direction I want it to go. We're going to go back and forth a lot with this very dark gray and a very light gray. Just lightly blending that. You can see in the reference photo that there's sort of a dark portion of this storm cell from the top left kind of down towards the bottom right, and that's a little bit what I'm trying to get here. Bringing in a little bit more of a medium gray. All of these, this sort of gradient of grays, they're all cool grays. I'm not really mixing a warmer gray with a colder gray. These are all sort of in that same cooler gray family, which will be important here. adding in a little bit of structure to the back end of this storm. And then underneath, I'm going to start getting in some of the colors. You can see in the reference photo that it's got this sort of orangey, purpley color underneath. So I'm going to use a kind of a gradient of that. I've got some kind of mid-tone oranges, adding in a little bit of a lighter one, and then sort of my lightest peach here in the middle. And then we're just going to blend that out. This doesn't need to be perfect. We're going to go back later on and add some more of a darker gray to the shelf cloud to define that better. What we're really doing here is blending this in and covering the page here. This is that darker gray I just mentioned that will come in to add a little more definition to our, I think this part is called a shelf cloud. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Now the lightest portion that I'm adding in there is ultimately sort of where the lightning will be, and that's simulating that the lightning is striking and it's sort of lighting up the area around it. But we'll add the lightning when we feel good that we're done with sort of that gradient underneath the cloud. I'm not using any really hard lines as I blend this underneath because I sort of imagine in real life that all of this would be sort of rain wrapped, so it's okay that it's pretty blurred. You'll see me go back and forth a few times, sort of around different parts of the cloud. I think some people probably work in a more methodical way. I sort of just build what I'm seeing and then move on to the next portion and come back to it. So you may see me now like working towards the back half of the storm, and a little bit I'll move over to the front half of the storm. It just allows sort of a very iterative process. There's no right or wrong here. So these little pastel sticks that I'm using, these are from Unison. They're based in the UK. I have the 120 set of half sticks, which is, if you're looking for a large set and have a decent budget, like this set is a workhorse. I use these little pastels in almost every painting I do. You see here, this little orange one is also a half stick from Unison. It's just got a beautiful range of colors, and there's so much you can do with them. Unison tend to be, of the soft pastels, I would say they're sort of in the soft to medium. They're not really buttery, but they're not super dry and putting off a ton of dust. I know pastels can be expensive, especially when you're getting into the higher quality brands. So a half stick, which many brands make, is a great option to get the same quality pastel, just in a slightly smaller package. And honestly, oftentimes pastel artists end up breaking the sticks based on what they're trying to paint, so don't feel bad. Just going to bring in a little bit more of this dark value. Just remember that depth and that contrast is what brings it depth. I'm not pressing super hard, I'm just trying to get a little bit of pigment down and then blend it in. And you can see in the reference photo, a lot of this can feel kind of wispy. It's not just a solid block of dark gray. So you see me sort of moving the pigment around lightly in different shapes and directions to try to simulate that. And then I'm just lightly brushing it across. I'm not blending super hard. I'm just kind of guiding the pigment around a little bit. I'll fast forward a little bit here just to spare your watching. And I realized through part of this video, I have to turn down some of the volume on mine because my son was refusing a nap that day and just singing to himself in the background. So if you hear what sounds like a toddler, it's my toddler. It's the joys of parenthood and having lots of hobbies and careers as a parent. So I'm just coming into the edge of this cloud here, adding a little bit of that rough, kind of jagged cloud look along where it meets that lighter contrasted area. You can really see that the structure of that storm is now pretty well established. So I'm bringing in a few more of my medium grays to start layering in that depth, just lightly pressing and really adding that texture. I'm not always even blending at this point. I'm sort of tapping it in, lightly dusting it a little bit with my fingers so that there's not very hard edges. If you like a style that is a little heavier on mark making with your pastels, then I think this reference gives you a lot of freedom to play with that if you want a little bit more prominent markings. I'm just going to speed through this a little bit. I'm just bringing in that lighter value to help bring in the depth to that cloud. Feel free to pause or slow down if this is going too fast for you. This is really just to spare you from the video being too long. And again, we don't want to be too afraid of the contrast. So this is a pretty light gray. And in this case, I'm not cleaning my finger every time because it's helping to dampen it a little bit, but still add a good amount of contrast. When I get into the lighter portion of the clouds where I'm starting to move, you'll notice my hand comes away from the page more often because I'm actually getting some of that extra pigment off my finger by just wiping my hands on a dry rag. Not washing my hands every time, but just really getting off the loose pigment from my fingers. This is an important spot in the cloud that I'm paying particularly close attention to, just around the edge of that, because that helps give it that structure and makes it feel that rounded portion. So you'll notice that I had just put in quite a bit of that dark gray there. Bringing in some of this lighter gray, lightly dusting it around. That looseness in the pigment helps give it some of that cloud feel. So I'm just going back into sort of this area of the clouds where you have a lot of contrast between the dark and light, and allowing this section to be a little bit more jagged. I think These are a little bit more loose clouds, a little bit scary looking clouds. So a little bit of texture is nice. Then making sure I've got a dark enough value along that edge and along the bottom to provide the contrast and drama that we're looking for. Now this is a pretty light gray, but I will say it's not white, and that is on purpose because we want to make sure that our brightest spot on the whole painting is the lightning that we'll add later on. So just layering in till we're happy with it. You can keep playing with it. If you're using a pastel paper, it can take a lot of layers, so don't worry if you're going over it, 3, 4, 5 times. So I'm just going back in and kind of defining that edge of the storm there, because I think that's a really dramatic place. And as I'm blending, sometimes it gets a little bit lost. So going back in over there and establishing that again. And then adding just a little bit more detail into those clouds there. And then here is actually, I think, an important spot. I add a little bit of a dark muted teal because in the reference photo you can tell that both that bottom right corner and the edge of the cloud are both very dark values. So in this case, I'm actually adding in a little bit of blue to give it a little bit of contrast. So I'm just lightly kind of glazing it on top and blending it. And then coming back in to keep the structure of that cloud differentiated from the rest of that dark sky. This is sort of the point of the painting where I always feel like it's so close but so far all at once. So if you feel that, don't worry. Every painting goes through this stage no matter what. Just power through and keep going if you're enjoying it. It's okay if it's not quite there yet. It usually comes together at the end. make sort of that shelf cloud there dramatic with some dark grays. And I think hanging off the edge of storms, you know, in this reference photo and most major thunderstorms, you sort of see these little wisps of dark cloud hanging down. My dad and I used to go do some storm spotting when I was younger. We would call them scary looking clouds. It didn't always indicate that there was something terribly bad happening, but they looked scary. Coming in with a little bit more of a lighter value, starting to brighten up that area. Trying to match my reference photo here. I'm also oftentimes, when I feel like I stare at a reference photo for too long, I start to try to find places in the reference photo that are in totally different spots but may have the same value. Because I think sometimes you can just, it's like you stare at it for too long and you almost don't even see it anymore. So just coming back in with a little bit more texture. I'll fast forward through a little bit of this. These are just sort of those final details around the top of this cloud. Just continuing to go in with some of the lighter values, back to darker values. This is all very iterative, just trying to give the clouds the texture that I want. And then coming back in, because through the blending process, not uncommon for colors to sort of get smudged a little, so adding in that lighter peach again as I get closer to doing lightning. Now this spot is something in the reference photo that I think would be easy to miss, is there's sort of these like puffy little clouds at the bottom of this shelf cloud. So I'm going in and I'm adding a little bit of darker value, and in just a second you'll see me come in with my lighter color. That just helps fill in those last details, give it a little bit more texture like we see in that reference photo. Just bringing a little bit more of that dark value in. Lightly blending it with my fingers just so that I don't have too crisp of a line where I don't want it. Not pressing very hard. If you press too hard here, you'll start to get sort of a muddy experience with your pastel. So I'm very light in my touch here. Just continuing to layer in, add some of that detail. Feel free to fast forward through or pause or slow down, whatever pace works for you. So I think my clouds are getting pretty close. I'm gonna start trying to put in my lightning, and normally this works better than it is here. You'll actually see me switch to a different pastel in a minute, but use whichever pastel you have on hand. This is my pure white. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking the very edge and rolling it in the direction I want it to go. Yeah, here's my Rembrandt. Rembrandt is still a soft pastel, but of the soft pastels, these are a little bit harder. They have a really nice edge to them, and I think they lay down pigment a lot better. You see, I actually blended it out and tried again. So if that happens, don't feel bad. But these Rembrandt pastels are really good for getting in these fine lines. I get asked this question a lot because I often have very fine lines in my pastel painting, and I would say like 8 out of 10 times I've used, the very edge of a Rembrandt pastel to do that. And I think one of the reasons why that lightning strike stands out so well is because that's really the only place we've used white. I try to use white very sparingly in my paintings, and really only to get that effect of something glowing. But there are also no rules in art, so if you like using white, you enjoy that and keep doing it. It's a great tool to have on your palette. So just putting in some tiny final touches on the clouds before we get started on the field. All right, so I've got my green and I'm starting to just add my base layer of the green for the horizon line, and I found that I've lost a little bit of my horizon line here, but that is okay. I'm trying to fix it just with my finger and end up going just a little too far. So I grab my ruler again, because that horizon line is really important for perspective in landscape painting. So I'm just gonna get my straight line established, and it'll go over a little bit of the pigment from underneath my storm cloud, but that's okay. Now that I've got that reestablished, I'm laying in some dark green. We'll go back in and add some accents, but I like to get a layer of dark green in and blend that out. Oops. And I tend to do, like when you look at the reference photo, it's a pretty dark field, so that's why I'm starting with the dark green for my base layer here. Just gonna blend that out. I don't want this layer to be too thick because we're gonna add a lot of texture and pigment on top of this. So just enough to kind of cover that page. See, I'm just gonna keep blending it so I don't have too much. Now there's some small trees and things in the distance, so I'm adding that in here with just a slightly darker green. In this particular reference photo, those accents in the distance are dark. There are cases where you may want them lighter, but in this case, those trees along the horizon line are dark. Just blending. I'm not going to worry about adding in every single detail. I'm just sort of adding a little bit of texture to imply for the viewer that there are some trees in the background. It's so far away and they're so small, there's not a lot of room to do too much with it, so don't worry too much about that. Still staying mindful of that horizon line. And then I like to, when I'm painting grasses, typically the closer I am to it, so towards the bottom of the page, I like having that darker. That helps also bring some depth to your painting. And you can see this is a very, very dark green. So don't be afraid of your dark colors. Then I'm going to start adding in some accents. These square, sort of rectangular shaped pastels, these are Terry Ludwig pastels. I have both the Terry's Legacy set, and then I think this is from their Marshland or Wetland set. I love this sort of limey green. I'm just sort of kind of tapping in the texture. We're not going to try to do every blade of grass, you know, in this area that's really intended to be pretty far away from us. As the field is closer to us and further lower on the page, we'll add a little bit more detail, but just sort of tapping this in. The nice thing about these Terry Ludwig pastels is they sort of lay down pigment very easily, so you don't have to use a lot of pressure. I'm just sort of tapping the edge, either the corner edge or even the flat surface to the page, and it'll put some pigment down for you. As I get closer, I'm adding a little bit more, just tapping and dragging up. I'm hoping to capture some of that texture that it lays down, and then between every few swipes, I'm actually going to wipe off the pastel itself, because you can almost see it there. You can end up with pigment from what's on the page on your pastel, and when you keep your pastel clean as you go, it's a little bit easier to prevent things from getting muddy or contaminating it with darker pigment. Now I'm going to start adding in a little bit more detail. I like to sort of blend a little bit with my fingers, because most of the time I don't want lines that are too hard, but particularly towards the bottom of the blades of grass, so that they're lighter as they go higher up and darker as they get closer to the ground. This is a Rocher pastel, and sort of a little bit more of a mossy olivey green. It could be nice to use a mix of both warmer and cooler greens. It just adds a little bit more texture to it. Again, not pressing super hard, just sort of lightly detailing in some blades of grass here. Then I'm going to come in with an even lighter green. Again, lots of different shades of green here can help show that some blades have a little more light on them, some blades of grass are a little bit more in the shadow. I love these lime greens. I can't help myself. This is also a Rocher pastel. This is just a half stick that they've got. I will link these in my bio. Don't worry about needing to get this exact set. These pastels have a lot of really great history to them, but they are very expensive, so don't worry about having these. I had just gotten them, so I was sort of excited to use them. But there are a lot of great pastel options that give you this color palette too. And this is not quite black, but nearly black. I like to add that in. It just gives it a little bit more depth. Sort of helps to account for some of the shadows that you might see. Some people swear you shouldn't use black in art, but I love it. So don't be afraid to break that rule if it works for you. And then we're just going to bring in some more highlights and layers. I like to sometimes change the direction of them. Occasionally, to get a different texture, I'll sort of catch the edge of a pastel and roll it. Just a few different ways to add different textures as you're painting your grass. That way they're not all just straight up and down lines. Sometimes you can see here I'm actually dragging the whole side of the stick up because you can get some interesting texture that way. So experiment with it, see what works for you. Such a nice texture, coming in with a little bit of a darker green. And here you can really just keep playing with it until you are happy with what you see. There's no right or wrong here. This is just really meant to be a beautiful, like, soft patch of grass underneath this thunderstorm. Coming back in with that darker color to keep my depth. And then why not add a few little accents of flowers. I don't add a ton of detail when I do flowers in this instance. We're just implying for the viewer that there could be some flowers here. But that is optional. It's not in the reference photo. It was just how I was feeling that day. So take some creative freedom, do what feels good to you. One of the things that I do like to do when I'm adding wildflowers to a field is using colors that are in a gradient as well, almost like what we talked about in the sky. So if I have sort of a deep yellow, then I like to also add a few lighter yellows. I think it just adds a little bit of depth and helps tie it together, and it makes those flowers look a little bit more realistic because you've got then things that might be within a shadow and things that might be hitting the sunlight. Now I'm just going back in with my dark again, just to make sure I don't lose that depth from having the darker value at the bottom of the grasses. You can do this until you feel happy with it. Adding in a little bit of a deep blue here. Sometimes that can add a nice feel to it. And coming back in with my black. And then I just keep layering, adding in some darks, bringing in some lights. This is really the point where you can decide if you're happy with it or if you want to keep going. I probably should have stopped, truthfully. Just mixing in those colors. Now coming back in, this is a slightly different pastel stick. This is a Giraud. It's a French brand. I love these. These are a little bit harder. I like these skinny sticks because now I'm going to go in and just add a little bit of a finer texture to the grass. These are pretty hard. You can kind of catch the edge of them. So using that lime green that I love so much just to make some more detailed strokes. Sometimes to add a little bit of texture, you can see I'm actually rolling the edge of it versus pulling it. That's sort of a way you can catch a little bit of a different texture and add a little bit of detail. Coming in with this Terry Ludwig and just kind of tapping a few straighter edges in. And that's the Thunderstorm. I hope this helps. If you like this video, share it, comment, save it, and let me know what you want to see next. Happy pasteling.